Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and also our respected elderly. I hope over the next 20 minutes, I'm able to provide you as much information about China. I know that there are previous speakers have already spoken about a lot on China, but just let me highlight to you what I'm going to say. I'll go briefly through the macro and the policies, and of which I have to talk a bit on economic, and I'll touch on technology innovation, and as well as China Green Revolution. Okay, the point here is that I believe you all have always listened to the news to get in touch with what's happening in China. But however, I just want to highlight that certain Western narrative, you have to make your own judgment. Okay, and in this case here is that, come tomorrow, China will officially open up without any restrictions, and thereby ending their 3-year self-imposed isolation from the rest of the world. The point here is that, they have actually taken what we deem as a scientific or a decision based on scientific evidence. I think all of us are also aware that, the current COVID variant, whether is it the Omicron variant or the XBB variant, is actually not very fatal. So in many senses, that I think what our government in Singapore, when we make the decision to open up, basically to all travel, I think there was some anxiety by Singaporeans, But I think what we also believe here is that, I think what it shows is that the current variant is not that fatal, in terms of fatality rate. So while the Western media will highlight that possible 2 million deaths in China, I am sorry to highlight to all is that it's unlikely to happen. And even if it happens, I just again want to highlight to everyone is that, US have a death of 1.1 million people in US, but the stock market continues to be very high. So death, actually, the market doesn't really look at death, but markets look at business or economic certainty. So without the zero COVID policy, what it means is that the government is open up. There will be no more lockdowns, no more supply chain bottleneck, as we have all heard over the last 1 year. What it means is that there are actually more certainty for businesses. And therefore, it is actually a good opportunity, if you really want to invest in China for the next 2-3 years. You look at China data here is that there's nothing to shout about over the next 1 month, next 2 months, until after Chinese New Year. Why is that so? It's because I think at this moment the figures are very weak, but the market look forward. Markets normally have to be, the way it is that they don't look at the current data now. These data are useless. They are weak data, and it's expected. But what I want to highlight to everyone is that come 2023, China's growth will be around 4.9 to 5%. That is basically the strongest growth driver of all the other countries in the world. So we talk about major countries like US, like Europe, Germany, UK, or Japan, for example. China, being the second largest economy in the world, is going to have a growth of at least 5%. And that is actually underpinned by consumption and Okay, unlike as we have all talked about, talk about inflation. I think the previous speaker also talked about energy prices going up very high. The point here is that China does not have an inflation problem. China's inflation last count was at 1.6%, and meaning that interest rates can be very accommodative for economic growth. So in that sense, I just want to highlight to everyone is that not the whole world is in hyperinflation. Even Singapore is in inflation. But the point is that in China, inflation is just at 1.6%. And therefore, their interest rates are actually pretty accommodative. I know that for the past 1.5 years, investors are all very concerned about the property market in China. No doubt, I also agree that there were actually, a pretty tough situation then. But it's actually after, I would say, 1.5 years, since the crackdown of China Evergrande, which is the largest private property developer in China. But since then, what the Chinese government has also highlighted is that they will ensure, they come up with a 16-point plan to ensure that they will, ensure sufficient support to the property sector. So Chinese government is not, when I study China and Chinese government, is that they are not in a habit to bail out companies that they are not obedient to them, I mean, in a sense that these are all private-owned enterprises. We're not talking about Jack Ma, all this. They are not obedient. So you cannot do that to the communist, regime that we are talking about in China. But after 1.5 years, when China wants to ensure a soft landing, I believe that they can do it with time. Okay, I know you all also may have all followed news about the Chinese market, especially on politics, and meetings about people like Joe Biden and China, and recently even Philippine Marcos went to meet with Xi Jinping, and also Saudi Arabia, when Xi Jinping went to visit Saudi Arabia. So there's actually a lot of happening over the last 3 months. And that actually, to us, is that it actually is making the environment pretty conducive for the Chinese stock market, or Chinese economy forward. I just want to highlight here is that how you look at it is that over the last 2 years, in 2021, China, the Chinese government hit at all the rich e-commerce company like Jack Ma, for example, Alibaba, the point here is that they want to do a regulatory crackdown. And the market disliked uncertainty, and therefore the market actually fell. And last year, 2022 was because of COVID lockdown. Okay, what we have right now is that it's the end of COVID. They have declared lifting of zero COVID policy. And what happens also is that in terms of Jack Ma, I think over the weekend you have read the news is that they have actually allowed Ant Financial to be listing soon. So meaning that they also going forward are going to be more pro-business. So all this concern about all this regulatory crackdown, common prosperity, the 2021 story. 2022 was a COVID lockdown that hurt the market. It's also over. And if you look at the valuation right now, we believe that it's actually a good opportunity to invest in China over the next 1-2 years. But however, there are other issues as well. In the interest of time, just let me skip this, is that the keyword going to this MPC meeting, which just was 2 months ago, was that it's actually going to be scientific revolution, technology innovation. That will be the keyword over the next 1 year, for China. Okay, a few issues that you all need to consider. I'm not going to teach you geography here, but I just want to highlight certain facts so that you want to understand what is actually happening in China. A Taiwan issue is a very sensitive issue to China. If you want to do business with China, you have to recognize the One China policy. So meaning that you should not have official dealing with Taiwan. If you do that, then the Chinese government will be very unhappy because you are supposed to recognize the One China policy. what I highlighted on this chart here is that you probably also read is that, China is getting very aggressive in its naval power. I just want to show you this chart because you have to understand from here is that this is what we term as China naval perspective. In order to ensure national security of your country. I mean, we don't talk about Singapore. Singapore is so small. We're talking about a big country. As a superpower, you don't want war to happen in your country. Then you look inward. You have Russia on the north. You have Mongolia. You have Kazakhstan on the east. On the west, sorry. These countries are basically friendly countries to China. So what will happen here is that if you look at the issue here is that if there's any war that's likely to happen, it's actually going to be via the sea. And China will have to secure, what we term as the first island chain. So you need a bit of reading up to do, which I've done over the past 1 year. But the point here is that you have to understand why China is doing or conducting all this military exercise. The Western narrative will tell you that China wants to attack other countries. But we know that Chinese or China in general, they do not have the habit of conquering other countries. And therefore, what they are trying to do is to ensure that there is a first line of defense, which is what we term in here as the first island chain. But unfortunately, Taiwan is in the middle of this first island chain. And therefore, ultimately, Xi Jinping would like to ensure the security and take over, or what we term as a peaceful unification of Taiwan. And therefore, my basically belief is that over the next 2-3 years, nothing will happen to Taiwan. Business will be as usual. But unless there's a declaration of independence by the pro-separatists in Taiwan, then there will be potential for military conflict. Otherwise, nothing will happen. Sorry, in the interest of time, I just want to highlight here is that unlike in other, we have actually monitored this very closely in the sense that, China now is not the China 10 years ago. China has military weapons. And when we look at some of the military weapons, it's actually considered very advanced. And in some instances, even more advanced than the US. So we talk about hypersonic missiles, for example. By the way, Russia also used some of those during the Ukraine war. But the point here, I want to highlight here is that, there's only 2 countries that hypersonic missile. Hypersonic missile, what it means, for the audience, for the purpose of audience, is that they are so fast, they move at 5 times the speed of sound, that there will be no interception. So what it means is that US aircraft carrier cannot go close to China because it will just be wiped out by these hypersonic missiles. Because normal missiles or anti-missiles cannot reflect all these, what we term as high-tech weapons. And you look at some of the aircraft, all these are due to a lot of advanced, I would say, expenditure. You look at, for those who are very interested in aircraft, J-20 is a 5th generation aircraft fighter. So again, just for information, is that, it's not that US is now the leading, US is still the strongest in terms of military, but what I'm trying to say is that if you want to fight on the home ground of China, and China is only for defensive purpose, the point is that US might not be able to win. Okay, we also talk about US-China tech war. This is something that really happened over the past 4 or 5 months. The key here is that, no doubt, US is very strong in technology, especially on the software portion, software aspect. But the key here is that the market, a lot of Chinese consumers are buying all these chips. If you prevent chips from selling to China, what it means is that U.S. corporates will also be affected. So it's not like, U.S. can do anything and there's no impact on the U.S. corporates itself. Okay, I just want to highlight here is that unfortunately, we don't have much time, but the point here is that we don't really, for the last 3 years, we have not been to China. But I just want to highlight that China has been actually doing what we term as driverless, travel. They have operated a driverless taxi service in China, already started. So it's some development there, and this is because there is, they have 5G, in the system and proceeding to 6G. And on top of that is that, again, if China is technology is so backward, then they would not have achieved what we term as certain milestone. So the China space station will be the only space station in space when ISS is decommissioned. So, if they are low tech, then they wouldn't have all this. And not only US have the GPS, China has the Beidou navigation system to help, commercial use or military use in terms of navigation systems. So I would say that these are basically technology advances that China has made. Again, here in the interest of time is that the point is that if you buy the story of green energy, moving to green energy, China is an integral part of this because, for example, in terms of EV batteries, China basically dominates the market. In terms of EV cars, China at least have half the market share. So, not only than that, China has what we term as rare earth. So we are not talking about basic things like metal, steel, or whatever, copper. We're talking about rare earth. China is the biggest producer of rare earth in the world. Unfortunately, the key here is that China is the largest, in terms of export. It's the second largest in terms of economy, but they are the largest in terms of export. They also have the largest what we term as middle income consumer market. Just an example for how many cars are sold in US a year. The number is between 16 to 17 million. But China commercial vehicle sales is at 26 million. So what I'm trying to say is that Chinese consumer market is very big. And if you look at the news flow, is that China, in terms of its Belt and Road Initiative, are pretty strong. So every country want to befriend China because they can build high-speed rail. Just look at Indonesia, our near neighbor. They built from Jakarta to Bandung. And that's not the end. They want to build all the way from Bandung to Surabaya. And they need China, And not only that, here is that in terms of 5G, 6G, EVs, autonomous driving, AI, I think China is in the lead. So all in all, I just want to highlight to everyone is that don't be too negative on China. China has the talent. The third term will be very important. What Xi Jinping has to do is basically manage political influence. And as you see, the fourth point, they already lifted the zero COVID policy. And we look at valuation right now, it's actually turning more attractive. But there will be always some noises about US-China relations. But that aside, looking at the valuation, we believe it's actually a very good opportunity, a good time to look at this market again. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, you can always come up to the UOB AM booth. I can share with you what my investment insights are. Thank you very much. Oh.